welcome. It's our 7th month, as I was saying, and we really enjoy doing this, but really the work goes to Susanne. Um, it's just great to have these soirees together. So tonight, Susanne picked modern art. And
Oh,
I kind of thought I knew modern art. So boy, was I surprised. And I think you will be too, in terms of kind of the expanse and the information that Susanne has to share. So I'm going to turn it over to our mistress of many things, our dear friend, and let's see, a docent par excellence at the Crocker Museum and Art Gallery. So hang on,
Well, I tend to think so.
let me go find my the slideshow.
Okay.
Wait, this one. Here we go.
There we go. Oh.
And I will press from the start and take it away, Susanne.
Oh, wonderful. Well, as Claudia said, welcome. Thank you. This has been a joy for both of us. And this month, I decided to go modern still lifes. And first, let me do a caveat. I cheated on the Crocker because there are some non-Crocker pieces in our show tonight. And in the past, I've done pretty much all Crocker. So I just want to do that I did cheat. I am sorry. And no, the Crocker does not own a Monet or a Cezanne or a Gauguin or a Van Gogh. They painting that, but we have artists that shape California Impressionism and the post-impressionism art movement. So you brave souls, are we ready to start our modern art adventure? Good. So if I say modern art, what type of art comes to mind? And this is the interactive portion of tonight, so shout it out.
Something my kindergartner could do.
Okay.
Abstract.
Okay, something your kid. Abstract. Okay, Lil. Abstract. Anyone else?
Something I could do.
Lil, Pam. Okay, so something your toddler could do.
No,
Toddler granddaughter. Okay.
I'm always saying to Lillian, I could have done that.
Okay, that's what we hear. Anybody else has anything? Well, as I begin learning about modern art, I found that it was more than I imagined. And here's what surprised me. Claudia, you can go to the next slide. Is that modern art is not modern. It actually started around the 1860s and it went through 1970s. And it started pretty much with the Impressionists. And as you can see, there's always questions, is modern art the same as contemporary art? Nope, it's not. And there are a lot of isms in the modern art movement: Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Fauvism, Symbolism, Cubism, Dadaism, abstract. And I mean, there's just dozens of different movements. Some expand long periods of time, some were quite short. There's also, during this modern art time, there was the arts and crafts, which started in the mid 1800s, went to 1920s. There's the Art Nouveau, which were in the 1895, which very short, about 25 years. And then the Art Deco, which also was about 10, 15 years period. So there are modern art, I mean, this whole chain, it changed. So the question some people ask me is, why are we looking at still lifes? Well, I chose it because every artist did them. And you can see their evolution or their exploration of color or shapes or perspective in these still lifes. And I also want to stress that these movement dates are not set in stone, and many artists move between the styles or combined styles, and they overlapped, and sometimes they were challenging to distinguish from one another. But what I found was that modern art era offered freedom for the artist to look with different eyes at the world, or experiment where however they wanted in the art journey. So tonight we're just dipping our toe in the modern art water. This is only a itty bitty shot of the modern art experience. And also, I want to encourage you, anytime you have questions, just shout them out. We could do chat, but I'm not following chat. And Claudia can't see anything but what's on her screen because she's doing the technical for me tonight. So if you have a question, just shout it out. All right, any questions before we go to our next slide? All right, let's move on. Let's go back to the future and start before the modern art period. And it's called the Romanticism, and it was capturing more realism. And I want you to take a look at this gorgeous flower and fruit arrangement from 1850. And it expresses, I think, life basically as vivid as it can get. It's a moment of beauty that's captured for eternity. And when it's put in context with the old masters from 200 years before that, it just continues to capture the genre of that time. And the artist, who was Severin Rosen, did a magnificent job of this flower and fruit still life. And it celebrates nature's beauty. And it looks like it's enthroned on some stone ledge as it was presented on an altar. It may or may not be a realistic presentation because there are actual flowers and fruits that may not bloom or become ripe at the same time, and they're from different seasons. So it's the artist's interpretation of nature. But I want you to notice about this is that they're almost photographic, clean lines of detail. The brushstrokes are small and controlled. The viewer knows, where one color stops and the other begins. And this type of artwork was painstakingly executed, often hundreds of hours to perfect this object. There's no blending of colors on the canvas, and there's no messiness. It is perfections. The still lifes were in great demand during this time. Every collector or museum had to have several of them. And the question becomes, so what happened next? Why this change? Everything was going along just great. Well, a rebellion is what happened. Let's go to the next one, Claudia, please. There we go. I'm sure you recognize this movement. It's Impressionism, and it's probably the most important movements in the whole of modern painting. But before we get into this, I want to do a quick comment about there were several technical innovations that affected these Impressionist artists, and they helped lay the groundwork for this transition to modern art. Until 1840, artists using oil paints were pretty much limited to working in their studios since there really weren't any portable containers for their paints. But at that point, they were putting oil paint into these color-coded metal tubes, and that allowed the artist to paint anywhere, take their art supplies with them anywhere. They didn't have to be in the studio grinding up pigments or mixing they could do it in the studio or outside. The other innovation that was taking hold was photography, which was shunned by the establishment artist, but the Impressionist artists embraced photography and realized it really furthered their artistic path, because if one wanted a perfectly realistic painting, then take a photograph. So this gave them the freedom to actually start painting in a different way. And Impressionism began in earnest. At some point in the 1860s, there was a small group of about 30 young artists that was spearheaded by Edouard Manet and included Camille Pissarro and the monumental talent of Claude Monet. And they decided to paint very simply what they saw, what they thought, and what they felt. And it was a new way of representing life. They weren't interested in painting history or mythology or the lives of great men, and they didn't seek perfection in the visual appearances, in that near photographic but idealized realism that was expected of the day. Instead, these impressionists, which by the way is not the term they use, but was bestowed upon them by an art critic later when they were doing their show, they had their first show. These impressionists tried to get down on canvas an impression of how a landscape, a thing, or a person appeared to them at a certain moment in time. And so whether it was in the studios or outside in plein air, they abandoned the more exacting and controlled brushstrokes for looser brushstrokes, staccato strokes, if you want to call it that. They used lighter colors. In fact, that's what they were seeking. They were seeking the light of the moment, even in the studio. Every element they painted was also of equal importance. The drape in the background, every flower, the basket of fruit, everything was as important as one another. And for this reason, many critics faulted the Impressionist paintings for their unfinished, messy appearance. And they said they were kind of amateurish. They didn't seem that they were finished. The Impressionist moved from this is what I see to is this what I see? So they were beginning to question how they were putting what they saw onto their canvas or material. The Impressionists also rejected official and established exhibitions, like from the Paris Salon, which basically rejected them anyway. And they had they organized their own group, and they called them the Salon of Rejects, which is still which is still right, exactly, which is still today used. And of course, the public were initially very hostile to their showing. One artist's paintings were called palette scrapings placed uniformly on a dirty canvas. That could have been all of them. I don't know who he was referring to specifically, but regardless, this new style prevailed and changed the art world for generations. Can I go to the next slide, please?
Maybe.
Okay. Whoops, or not. There we go. Now this I put in because this was done by Guy Rose, who was one of the first California-born Impressionist artists. Born in California, lived in California. He was friends with Monet, and he was a colleague of Monet. He and his wife moved to Giverny and lived for several years. And you can see this Monet influence that he had as Guy Rose embraced the impressionistic approach. So let's go to the next one, because I want to show the kind of a comparative. There we go. Here's a comparative with what we saw of Rosen's floral arrangement and Guy Rose chrysanthemum. So you can see the very detailed work. The edging is impeccable. You can even make out the little dewdrops, the water drops on the flower petals. And then you look over at Guy Rose's chrysanthemums, and it's kind of messy. And when you look close at it, the closer you get, the worse it looks. The further away, the more complete it looks. And that's exactly what Impressionists were going to do. So, but of course, in the world of art, the artist and their art is never peaceful for long. And there's always a difference of opinions, and there's a lot of petty politics. So let's go to the next slide.
I just want to point out, you can even see the thorns on this, I mean, gosh, this is amazingly detailed.
Exactly. The closer you get to that, the better the most, it looks incredible. I mean, it's a gorgeous piece. I'd hang it in my home, but.
Oh, yeah.
I guess.
I'll take home, yeah.
I'll take that one. The Crocker had a showing of a couple of years ago called American Beauty, and Severin Rosen was. They had several works of his in it, and they were glorious, absolutely glorious. So by 1886, the differences in artistic philosophy and the geographical location and individual character led to kind of a gradual breakup of the Impressionists. The Post-Impressionists is used to describe that rebellion in the 1880s against Impressionism. And it was done pretty much by four artists. That was Paul Cézanne, Paul Gauguin, Vincent van Gogh, also I call him Vincent van Gogh, and Georges Seurat. And the Post-Impressionists kind of rejected the Impressionists' focus or concern with spontaneity and the natural rendering of light and color. They favored an emphasis on more symbolic content and more formal order, structure and shape. And like their Impressionist colleagues, they also looked at the optical effects of color. Paul Cézanne, which we see here, and the next one.
You want me to move on?
Yes, please. And Paul Gauguin were the two giants in this movement. And I want you to notice these intimate, studied view of these kind of ordinary objects. The Post-Impressionists also believed that color should be and could be independent from the form and the composition. And it was more of an emotional reaction they had. What I love about this is the simplicity and the complexity of the fruit that's balanced in the bowls, and the peppers that's balanced on this table. And the Cézanne, you can see that the table is also gently sloping. It's array of patterns. They complicate the setting. It shouldn't work, but this does. It does work. And Henri Matisse was also a very superb post-impressionist, and he was a Fauvist painter, which we'll talk a little about in a bit. He was a huge admirer of Cézanne, and this is Gauguin. Cézanne was the first one, and he owned nearly 40 of Cézanne's works. He said in 1941 that if I knew there was a Cézanne picture within 100 kilometers, I'd be off like a shot to look for that something new. So that says something when your colleagues love your art. And not every colleague loved each other's colleagues' art, even though they may have been in the same movement or they were doing very similar things. The critics group these various styles within the post-impressionist time into two kind of general, they're opposing stylistic trends. One side was structured, or the geometric style that was kind of the precursor to Cubism. And then the other was more of the expressive, the non-geometric art that led to more of the abstract expressionism. So any comments? Of course, I just want to point out, artists did not name themselves Impressionist or Post-Impressionist or Dada or Surrealist, or they never call themselves by that. Those were terms that were coined or bestowed by art critics or curators or somebody looking for some kind of label for them, and to kind of separate and make sense of these different styles that were going on. For instance, post-impressionists were coined by a British curator in 1910. He was doing part of an exhibition, and he was looking for something to unify these post-impressionist widely divergent work. And he called them post-impressionists. And of course, they were all dead by this point. And the title worked, but that was about it. Again, most critics heaped the same amount of abuse as when the Impressionists had their first show. Some said, "You call that art?" Some said, "My toddler could do that." But the term stuck, and then ushered in this it's almost a visual language of imagination, and it's an era when painting surpassed its traditional role, and which was, they called it a window into the soul, and instead this one, post-impressionist, became a window into the artist's mind and soul, and it spawned more more movements and different types of art. Okay, so let's move on and take a look at what California Impressionists were doing at this time. And I just want to touch base very quickly with two different pieces. California, the Impressionists and Post-Impression were slower to take hold than the French Impressionists. It went a little longer than the French Impressionists. So two works. This was Childe Hassam's Portrait of Miss Weir. You can see the Monet influence. He obviously was concerned with light and the weather and the surfaces, and he kind of did not do everything that the French Impressionists did. He kind of slowed everything down. He really believed in, we're going to just do more in kind of very calm people, some flowers, you know, very, very gardeny type work. It was interesting that Hassan was very well known. His work was very well received, and he was very devoted to Impressionists and Post-Impressionism, but he steadfastly refused to adopt any of the innovations in modern art coming from Europe, such as Cubism or Dadaism or Surrealism. He just refused to go there. He said that was not art at all, which is funny coming from him doing Impressionism when that was what was said, you know, 50 years, you know, before that. Anyway, and the one on our right is our friend, E. Charlton Fortune, Euphemia, or Miss Effie. And of course, she was a very dynamic force living and painting in the Monterey Bay Area for most of her life. She did go study in France. She was a follower of Monet and Van Gogh. And you can see she embraced these colors and vibrant brushstrokes of Post-Impressionism. And her painting, all her paintings reflect that. And this is one of her still lifes that is just phenomenal. It could be a Van Gogh, or it could be a Monet.
You know where that one is?
You know what? I looked for this one. This one just popped up. I kind of think it's at the Monterey Museum of Art, but I'm not sure. I know they have a couple of her still lifes, but I don't know where this one was. And I could not find much more about it. It just happened to come up in my search. So I'll keep looking because it's lovely. I know you can buy a copy of it.
Okay.
Okay, so
Run down to the museums, Lillian, and see if it's there.
yeah, would you, Lil, please let me know?
Sure.
The Museum of the Monterey Museum of Art has a lot of E. Carlton Fortunes because that was her stomping ground. That's where she did most of her work, and she was very effective and very well known in that area. She was actually probably one of the better California Impressionists at the time. And so anyway, as we're moving ahead, you know, shortly after the turn of the century, roses and other flowers, both cultivated and wild, had become very popular subjects for California artists, especially in the southern part of the state. Claudia, we can go to the next one, please. And although other artists were excellent painters of roses, the king of rose painters was Franz Bishop of Pasadena. These are on china pieces. You see them, they look almost glass-like, but they are porcelain. Bischoff began his china painting career in Bavaria. He was born in Austria. He trained in Vienna, then he moved to New York, taking a job as a decorator in a china factory. And then he and his wife moved to Michigan, where he taught watercolor and China painting to women. It was an acceptable thing for women to take China painting on porcelain. And he produced elaborately painted, as we can see here, porcelains that are absolutely stunning, but very much in that impressionist style. And he also taught, he also formulated a lot of colors on his own for the glazing and firing of these. But what he did was, although he was well known for his exquisite porcelains and roses and other flowers, mostly roses, when he moved west, he moved to Pasadena. You want to go to the next one? And he built a home and studio in the, thank you, Claudia, in the Arroyo Seco area, overlooking the valley where the Rose Bowl is located now. And he began to paint oils on canvases. And this is one of his that are an absolute California icon. And it is a California style that is pretty much done in for the California artist. And it was absolutely stunning. He painted flowers, and he actually, he and his wife put in a garden, and he used a lot of his work, his gardening in his paintings. But this, I don't necessarily know it was out his back door, but it wasn't far from where he lived. And it doesn't
Suzanne,
look like that now. Pam?
Suzanne, this is Pam. I did a little search, and if I can go back to the Carlton Fortune.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, it sold in 2017. It had been owned by a woman in Ross, California, and
Oh.
she sold it to somebody in England, so it's probably not in Monterey.
Oh, okay, Lil.
Yeah, well, that was a good guess. And it sold for $106,000.
That's all?
Ooh.
Yeah.
Wow.
You can buy one. And it sold through the Bonhams auction.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. I'll keep looking. That's the most recent information about it I could find.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that.
You're
Excellent. Well, I guess we all can afford one now. A reproduction we can afford.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to,
Does this one have a name or anything?
yes, it's called Arroyo Seco, the Arroyo Seco. And it was painted in 1918, I believe, 16 or 18, the Arroyo Seco. Now let's go on to the Fauvism. Now, I mentioned that earlier, and that this was kind of an offshoot of the post-impressionists from Cézanne and Gauguin, Seurat, and Van Gogh. And Fauvism, or wild beasts, were a loosely allied group of the French painters, and they have shared interest. And the leader of this group was Henri Matisse. And what is so distinct about the Fauvists were this use of intense colors as a vehicle to describe light and space and this perspective. And the Fauvists thought this pure color and form were a way to communicate their emotional state and project a mood. So there were a lot of similarities with the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists about why they did things, but the use of these colors and the perspective, almost flat, was kind of a new branch. And what is stunning to me about this is that these saturated colors kind of draw that attention to that flatness of the canvas or the paper, but there's always a lovely balance of composition. Everything in this is strong and unified. Everything has a specific role. There's nothing extraneous there. The cloth, the flowers in the cloth, the stand, the background piece, the bowl with the fruit in it. And most important thing that the Fauvists valued was individual expression. And there was a lot of argument among themselves and opinions about other pieces because, of course, they valued their individual expression. So this was Henri Matisse, and of course he was a collector of Cézanne. He loved Cézanne, and this kind of sparked. We'll see as we move forward in time how this also built other movements built on Fauvism also. So let's go to our next one.
Susanne, where did the name Fauvism come from?
It means wild beasts, and I think that was the feeling on how they painted. They were wild colors. There was wild brushstrokes. They were fast. It was just in your face type, and a very different. It almost begins to border on the abstract. It's starting to move into that abstract period of time. So. If anybody else has a comment about the Fauvist, please speak now. Let me know. Okay, well, we'll talk about this one. Now, this is kind of, it's kind of a combination of different movements. It has some of the post-impressionist. It has a little bit of the impressionist with the softness of it. It's beginning to incorporate a little bit of abstract, but the artist Rinaldo Cunha was a fan of Paul Cézanne.
Yeah.
He had his training in London. I mean, he had his training, excuse me, in San Francisco. And he went to London, and he went to Paris, and then he returned to the San Francisco Bay Area and then settled in San Anselmo, where he painted most of his life after that. He moved to a college, and then he moved to a cottage briefly on Telegraph Hill, and he produced art that one of the critics said seemed to express the soul of his own city. He didn't really do a lot of still lifes like this. This is one of his. He mostly did landscapes, but he seemed to capture this random, not randomness of having where the pears are. They're actually placed very strategically, and they have their own, to balance this composition. You notice the pear on the far left is balanced with the pear in the lower right, which is balanced by the drape that sits up on the top right-hand side. So everything comes together. Again, he used colors that the Impressionists were also, and he let the eye blend a lot of those colors together. The blues complementary of the yellows, which a little bit of the reds in there. So he was a master at it. He's not overly well known. He was well known at the time, but not so much after he passed away. He also did a lot of WPA murals that were painted in Coit Tower in San Francisco. So you can go see that some of his murals with Diego Rivera is also at that time. So let's go to the next one. And I want to show you back to Paul Cézanne on how that influence was so strong. What was interesting about Rinaldo Cunha was that he actually perfected a lot of styles. He did a lot of styles, and then he assimilated them into his own. And so he took Cézanne's style, this post-impressionist, and then he assimilated and made it with his own, with slightly his own, a little softer than I think Cézanne's were. But certainly was a master at it. Okay, now, what do you think has been going on? Yeah, here we go. Everybody, I bet you all recognize this artist, Picasso.
Yeah.
And Picasso had been dabbling in Cubism and abstractism since, about mid 1910, 1912, around that time. So he had been working on these compositions, and what the Cubist group had been doing and moving into the abstract is that they were taking a lot of what they saw and you know, deconstructing these objects. And as he moved into the 30s, Picasso started using this kind of flat graphic styling and reducing everything to its most simple forms. And what he also did was, if you notice, called dish of pears. And we would say, well, I don't know any blue pears, but for the abstract and the cubist and even the Fauvist and you can paint whatever color you wanted, whatever color you saw, or whatever you thought the light was telling you, that's what you painted. What's so interesting about this one is that the white area behind the fruit was added as the final layer of the painting. Not first, that most artists did first. They painted the background and then they layered in the midground and then the foreground. Picasso kind of did it backwards. But so what that did, it creates kind of a sense of space behind the pears. And it also, instead of just a flat background, it kind of gives it, they might be floating. And as we move forward in time, we're going to see a couple of artists who also use that began to use that technique. He also used this thick black lines to separate the different elements in the painting. And it's almost an abstract of colors and shapes. And Picasso painted still lifes throughout his entire career, and in a variety of different styles. He truly embraced every different movement that you could possibly think about. So speaking of abstract, so when I say abstract expressionism, I'm sure many of you immediately think of Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko. So we can go to the next one. There we have a Mark. He blended surrealism, which was another isms. There's a lot of ism with expressionism, and his signature style. He divided the canvas horizontally. His signature style was 3. This one could be considered. There was 2 main ones, and then the third. His signature was kind of almost 3 blocks of color, these dominant shapes and planes and colors kind of softly merge into one another, and they're warm and cool colors. This one is a warm color, and they create these pulsating feels. That's kind of what he wanted his paintings to awaken the viewers to the human emotion. And a lot of people kind of look at these and say, this is what my 5-year-old could do. I could do this. But I have to tell you, abstract is very challenging to do. To get a feeling, to get a perspective, to get a dimension, to get an emotion from it, it is very challenging to do that. And he wanted the viewers to become enveloped in his compositions. They were large, and he wanted, when you stood in front of them, to get immersed in the emotions that they expressed and evoked. So I'm not sure you're going to get much emotion looking from this little one, but it does give you a sense of feeling, of some kind of feeling. Rothko was very interesting, as he supported artists' total freedom of expression, and he felt that art during his time was compromised by the market. It kind of put him at odds with the art world establishment, and he publicly responded to critics many times, and it wasn't always polite. And he occasionally refused commissions, and he refused sales, and he refused exhibitions at times when he didn't feel it was right for him, or or was not properly done. So he was very impassioned about. He painted what he believed, and um, he lived what he believed. So let's go to another style that was happening during this time. And this artist, John Emmett Garrity, practiced a style of painting that was known as synchronism. And it was a matter of, synchronism is a matter of kind of analyzing color and movement and form. And it was founded actually in 1912 by artists Morgan Russell and Stanton McDonald Wright. And Garrity was a follower of theirs. And even though this one was done in 1950s, he used a lot of the principles of synchronism. And the term synchronism uses the word symphony and chrome. So music and color. And Russell actually thought about that, and he put those two words together. So the resulting paintings were called synchromonies. And he said, I'm going to use the color scale in the way notes might be arranged in a musical piece. So, it just means with color, and as a symphony means with sound. So if you look at that, you kind of feel that there might be some musical, it's very rhythmic. There's a lot of stuff happening. It has some of the cubism. It certainly has Fauvism color. It has, it's just deconstructing pieces, but they're put back together in different color block ways. It seems like it's chaos, but it's actually very harmoniously blended. And what synchronistic followers did was they kind of pushed these planes of cubism, like we saw in Picasso's Pears, in new directions using these hues and complementary colors. And a little about Garrity, he was born in Los Altos, California. He began studying art in 1919, and he both kind of informally, and then he went to the California School of Fine Arts. And that's where he corresponded with Stanton McDonald Wright, who by 1920 was the director of the Student Arts League of Los Angeles. And that's why he got kind of connected with this synchronism. Again, it does use a highly colorful palette. He worked in watercolor and oil and gouache, and or gouache. His portraits and still lifes, landscapes, and figures were all executed in this bold modern style that were somewhat, again, reminiscent of Cézanne and Gauguin and Picasso. So now we move to any questions, comments? This one is actually at the Crocker. The Pears one before was at the and this is a gorgeous, absolutely gorgeous piece. And the more you look at it, the more you find.
Yeah.
And let's move to our next one. And we're going to talk about the Bay Area figurative movement. And this was done by Richard Diebenkorn. He began his career as an abstract painter, and he studied at the California School of Fine Arts under David Park and Elmer Bischoff, who were also abstract painters. And this was in the 40s. And he was, Diebenkorn went over as a junior faculty member of the California School of Fine Arts. And he was in direct contact with Mark Rothko. And he taught at the school in 1947. So what's important about Diebenkorn's work is he was doing abstract work, but he and several other fellow artists, ones that he met at the California School of Fine Arts, David Park, and Elmer Bishop, and to a small degree, Wayne Thiebaud, who's a local artist, kind of came in in one aspect of it, formed the Bay Area figurative movement in the 50s and 60s in the San Francisco Bay Area. And this was a group of artists who kind of abandoned working with the prevailing style of the abstract and expressionism of Pollock and Rothko, and they returned to figuration or figurative painting. And that was actually what they meant by figurative, was putting in figures or recognizable objects. This was very specific to the San Francisco Bay Area, but and they painted a lot of the landscapes of the Bay Area and still lifes. Diepenkorn took actually the biggest risk of all of them, because when he left abstract and went to figuration in 1955, he was nationally recognized for his abstract work. He was making a very good living about it. And he was also a beloved abstractionist, I guess is the good word, among the locals in Sausalito in California. So he was doing very well at the time. He lived in the Berkeley Hills. And then he began, about 1956, he started to attempt complex figure paintings. And his earliest figurative works were kind of loosely based on self-portraits, but he said that he found the analysis of the figure to be an immensely satisfying problem. But he was also very interested in working paint onto and about the canvas. And you can see in this work the texture and the layers of the paint, and these strokes that he put in were not subtle strokes. They were done with great energy, brushes or palette knives, and he created what he called these expressive surfaces. He began this intimate series of views of paintings by arranging cups or books or flowers on a table, and he studied them over and over again by reworking the paint. And these are pure abstract colors and a very moving, active, lively surfaces, and they're very emotionally charged. And when you stand in front of this, and this one is at the Crocker, you feel very, very activated, very energized, and that's exactly as Diepenkorn had intended. He was, of course, inspired by Cézanne and Matisse. And I'm going to call Pam Saltenberger. I'm going to ask you to talk about your story that you were telling us earlier about Diepenkorn.
Okay, so I grew up in Berkeley, and I went to school with Gretchen Diepenkorn, his daughter. She was 2 years younger than I, but we all sort of grew up in the Berkeley Hills. And I used to go to her house, and we all thought her father was absolutely crazy because he didn't work like any normal dad. He was in his studio throwing paint all over the place. And I've told Susanne, I wish as a kid I was smart enough to say, "Oh, Mr. Diepenkorn, can I just take one of these pieces that you've thrown here on the floor?" But and as Susanne said, he was successful. This was in the 50s and early 60s, and he was very successful. They lived in a big, beautiful home, and he was a really nice guy. But he, we could not believe that Gretchen's dad actually made a living doing what he was doing. So how foolish of us.
Some of it, exactly. Well, yeah, thanks, Pam. I appreciate that. And what's interesting is that in the mid-60s, Diepenkorn went back to doing abstraction, and he left the figurative. But the figurative influenced a lot of painters that came after him, and one of these is our favorite, and I can't end the evening tonight without Sacramento's own modern artist, and that's Wayne Thiebaud. And Thiebaud, to me, embraced all the different movements. He embraced the colors of the post-impressionist and the Fauvism and the geometric structure of cubism and kind of the rhythm of synchronism and abstract impressionists, and with a little dash of surrealism in there. He layered paints, and you can see in this piece, he layered his paints like he was icing a cake. They are full of texture and depth. And he also did his background afterwards in many of his paintings, like Picasso did in the Bowl of Pears. He became an expert at painting halations, and those are kind of the rainbow effects you get from spotlights, and they're around the edges of the objects. Sometimes they're a little hard to see in images like this, but when you see a Thibaut in person, you get this rainbow effect and this almost pulsating work. His whites were not whites. There were layers and layers of different color whites on there, and they actually popped all the work or these objects, just like a lot of the post-impressionists or the Fauvists, is that every piece, you know, that was ordinary, he made extraordinary. So that's our tour tonight, our very quick tour and very brief tour into some of the
Beautiful.
the isms of modern art. And I kind of again urge you to continue exploring on your own. But our last slide here is we started with just before Impressionists with these gorgeous detailed paintings of tight brushstrokes, moving to the Impressionists on your right, down to your synchronistic painting, and then farther left you get kind of the full Monty of all the different movements that influence the painters of today. I also urge you, this is a book called What Are You Looking At by Will Gompers, and it's a wonderful humorous discussion of the different movements of the modern art period. And he has some great stories in there about different artists, and I found this quite interesting, and I pulled a lot of information from this. So does anybody have a favorite one, or
Ooh,
Susanne, what was the name of the book again?
oh, it's called What Are You Looking At?
What are you looking at?
What Are You Looking At by Will Gompertz, Gompertz, Will
Okay.
Gompers.
Thank
And you can get it on Amazon used. This was a used one I got on Amazon, and it's a really wonderful, interesting book. Will Gompertz, he's a former board director of the Tate Gallery in London, and he's also a humorist, and I found a lot of his work very funny. So
Thanks.
anybody who has a favorite? And you'll probably never look at modern art again the same way, will you? Because I am never going to look at modern art again the same way.
I sure like the one of E. Carlton Fortune that got sold out from under us.
Well, you're down in her territory, Lil, in the Monterey Carmel area. You ought to
Well,
pick up a.
I'll
You gotta
find some
pick
more
up
of
one.
hers. Yeah. Yeah, I
Hey,
thought that was beautiful.
Lillian, this is Pam. You can pick it up off of ArtNet for like $90, and then nobody will know the difference. Put it in a nice frame.
Oh, okay.
I think we need to go to the garage sales around there. Somebody's got to have
And
one.
see, somebody might have one.
There
Well,
you
what was interesting is when Claudia and I were going over the slideshow today to make sure everything was working and looking at some pieces, we wanted to put a Rothko in. And what we found when you're looking for Rothko is that there are a lot of influence by Rothko and Rothko-like, and
Oh,
even called by the same names. And so you have to be very careful that you're not choosing somebody's
Somebody's kid.
Yeah, it's like, putting
Suzanne,
it.
there's a show out, what is it on Conrad? Netflix? I think it's on Netflix that we watched, a movie about this huge art fraud, this woman, very famous art dealer in New York. And
I saw that. Yeah.
wasn't it amazing? Yeah, it was all about this amazing guy who copied Rothko and others. It was really amazing.
Yeah, it was. Claudia and I had mentioned that to me, and I watched it, and she was a gallerist for many years, like 30 years, and Christie's got sucked in by her. I think it was
Yeah.
Christie's auction
And
house.
Sotheby's.
Sotheby's, yeah, man, it was
But the
amazing.
thing is that was interesting is that the gallery was owned by Armand Hammer's son, and he had continued that sham for a while too.
Mm-hmm.
Was it called The Art of the Steal?
I think that was the name of it. It was just fascinating how wonderful a copyist the guy from China was. That was amazing.
Yeah. No, The Art of the Steal was that other one, Lillian. It was the one about
Much earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so anybody else have a favorite piece before we go into our meditation?
Well, I like the T-bald. I wouldn't turn that one down if somebody offered it to me.
I wouldn't either.
And I love this one up in the corner, though. You know, the realist one. That's just mesmerizing.
They are, and it's there's so much there in the detail. You think, how can somebody paint that detailed, that perfect detail? Hours and hours and hours they spent on this. So interesting. Okay, well, if no one else
Thank
has
you.
you're welcome. Most welcome. Any other questions or comments? We'll turn it over to Claudia.
Suzanne, this is Pam. I just want to tell you what a wonderful job you did, and your PowerPoint gets better and better. Just so amazing.
Well, thanks, Pam. Coming from you, since you are the queen of PowerPoints, I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
what a title.
Yeah, I was like, well, we have to take it where we can find it, right?
Yeah, very professional, Suzanne.
Thank
Your-
you.
Your delivery.
Oh, thanks, Lil. I appreciate that. Well, the other thing I should say, there's two things coming up. One, the Crocker is open. You have to
Yeah.
make reservation, which is wonderful. Pam and I have been in, and I think she's going again tomorrow. And that there's a fantastic Tiffany glass show coming in June. And I'm not sure the date on June, but is having a lot of his stained glass and his the lamps, and it's from the Dry House collection, and that had been traveling around the United States. And some of the photos I've seen of the pieces are phenomenal. So I'm actually looking forward to that.
San, speaking of photos, your pictures are so clear and very, very nice. So
Thank you,
on top of
Pat.
everything else, I want you to know that. And
Thank you, Pat.
amazing. I loved it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne, as
You're
always.
welcome, Marlene. You're welcome. Well, why don't we just take a few minutes and just breathe out? And Claudia, I'm going to let you turn it over to you so we can just kind of close out here with a calm piece.
Well, Suzanne and I often talk about whether to put the meditation at the beginning or the end, but as you rest your eyes on this beautiful piece of art by Franz Bischoff, Aroa Seiko, I think that viewing art is almost a meditation in itself. And so I just invite you to breathe in and breathe out, relaxing. Your breath can guide you to just a total place of relaxation. If you inhale to count slowly to 4, and then exhale slowly to a count of 8. And now just maybe give your shoulders a shrug. Bring them up by your ears and then just drop them down to let yourself relax even further. And if you find your mind wandering during this meditation, that's okay. Just bring your gaze back to this photo, this picture, this beautiful painting, or your breath. And right now, I invite you to reflect on the beauty in your life, the joy in your life, the loving kindness in your life. Loving kindness is certainly a path we can choose to walk. Maybe you see the path in this painting, or maybe you see it in your mind's eye. And as you relax, you move deeper into that place of peace, that place of love, that place in your heart of compassion and kindness. And now I invite you to open your heart and listen to this poem by Frederick Hudson. Trust the mystery. We have no words to carry us beyond our time, no symbols to escort us into a fulfilled future. What we have and have well is our fire, our very here and fully present fire to ground us in the moment. How our current intensity relates to grander schemes is merely conjecture. I choose to believe in purpose without words, in deity without form, in unity without beginnings or endings. Do not ask me to explain. I believe, and in believing, I experience this day with mystery and with peace. Namaste, my friends. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been wonderful to see you all. And thank you, Susanne. You did such an amazing job.
Oh, thank you. Thanks. Thanks. Well, I realized what I was getting myself into when I said, oh, I think I'll just do some modern art. Until I was like thinking, there's only a couple. But it was a good learning for me too. And so I certainly enjoy it. So thanks for letting me experiment with you. and
Our
well, I'm not
pleasure.
sure. Oh, great. Well, if you have a suggestion, email me. You know what we can do next month. It always seems to be something different. And I know next month is Mother's Day. Maybe we do mothers or
There's all kinds of interpretations of that.
yeah. there are.
Did we do women? We talked about it.
We did it last month. Women's History Month.
Oh, women. Okay.
But we talked
Yeah.
about how much there was, the richness of women's art.
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
a lot, and there's quite a bit of mom art. You know,
Mary
mothers and.
Cassatt.
Beg pardon?
Mary Cassatt comes to mind.
Yeah.
That's right. It
Yep.
was women. I have it all
Yeah.
here.
Oh, you do. Well, the Crocker doesn't have America. You know,
There
the
will
Crocker.
be a test, Lillian. There will be
Yeah.
a test.
Yeah. You know, anybody can have a Monet. I mean, but not everybody has a Guy Rose.
Well,
Which-
since you've introduced us to modern, maybe you could introduce us to contemporary and see the difference.
Ah.
That could be any time too, you know.
And you're right. There absolutely is a difference in contemporary art and modern art, which I did not know when I was doing this.
until you started, because then
until I started.
I said, well, what happens after 1965?
Nothing.
So
There's
then-
no art at all.
then, well, we went into contemporary.
Yeah. So, you know, yeah, they're the uh, there is a misconception that modern art is contemporary art, which is what I had a misconception of that. And it's really understandable since modern and contemporary both mean current. And so you think, well, of course it must
Yeah,
be current art. But in the art world, they're different. They're kind of
right.
like grapes and oranges. They're both fruits, but they're different, very different fruits. And
Well, and also what we learned is, you know, when you think about when the Crocker first opened their art gallery, they bought a lot of quote unquote contemporary art because it was contemporary for their time, you know, in the late 1800s. And now you go in and you look at it and you go, why would you have called that contemporary at all?
exactly, exactly. And what I was reading that was that basically the difference is time and process. The turning point kind of in contemporary art was with the abstract impressionism. The focus became more on the process than the content. And as you can, Jackson Pollock was a great example where he was focused on the dripping process, and that's what he photographed versus the end product. Although that's what people wanted, were the end product. And so, you know, you see the modern art took the artist more serious, and then the genius of the artist. And the pop, you know, when you go into contemporary, it's not so much, it's the process, it's the art minimalist, it's conceptual art, it's performance art, it's social commentary art. And that changed that viewpoint. So it's not so much about the brushstrokes, it's more about the viewer's impression of the art. And of course, I'm not sure we're going to be around in another 100 years to know what people are going to say. That's contemporary, that's kind of stuff, you know, that's modern art again. So, you know, you know, what I always find when I'm looking at some of this contemporary stuff is that it always questions my aesthetics of art. Is it art or isn't it art?
Yeah.
You know, one of the kids on our tour said, well, it must be art, it's in a museum. Okay. So
That
anyway,
kid
yeah,
was smart.
maybe we do contemporary, because
Yeah,
there's
that kid was smart, Suzanne, because the question then becomes, what is art?
Right.
exactly, I don't know. That's a good question, and I think art's kind of emotional. It's an emotional reaction. That's kind of, for me, that's what art is. So
It's a good question, Pat, because, you know, sometimes I think about these people who create these artists, and they spend their whole life, their passion doing this, and it's like they don't care. Some of them don't care if they're successful or if they make money or whatever. And some of their art I wouldn't want in my house, but they have a passion for it. And so I wonder where that spark is, where that God spark is that like ignites them to create. You know, it's so interesting. We human beings are so damn interesting.
okay, well, ladies,
Thank you, Suzanne. It
You're
was
welcome.
wonderful.
Month.
It was wonderful.
so enjoyed us, and we'll do this again next month.
We'll
Okay.
be
Nice
there.
seeing
Okay.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Coming.
Thank you, Claudia, for running the show.
Hi.
My pleasure.